one of the stories that you told that really popped to my eye. I'm just starting my career here in journalism and all that stuff. So one of the worst feelings I could have is drawing attention to myself during a press conference or scrum or something like that. You talked about a story where you had broken your wrist in a men's softball playoff game, had to wear a Velcro cast, got it stuck on Paul Coffey's equipment, and brought it down. What was going through your head during that whole situation?
I just wanted to crawl in a hole, man. It was because there were like maybe 50 reporters around his locker in that little Nassau Coliseum locker room. And Coffey, I don't even remember if it was a win or a loss for Edmonton, but Coffey was mad, boy. The skates could have hurt him. The shoulder pads, the helmet, everything came down on top of him. And I wanted to crawl in a hole, and it was like one of those Snickers commercials, you're not very you're not very bright when you're hungry. That's how I felt. But that was a classic. That was sure was a moment that I can't ever forget, unfortunately.
Oh, absolutely. Coming back a little bit more recently, also in the book, you mentioned about how close the Rangers were to hiring Mike Babcock, not just this offseason, but back in 2021. Knowing what we know now, and obviously knowing what we knew in the past about Mike Babcock, do you feel like this team dodged a bullet with not being able to hire him?
And they dodged a bullet because John Davidson and Jeff Gorton wouldn't hire him. And it surprised me too that John Davidson ended up hiring him in Columbus. Ultimately, JD had to sign off on that, but he was the wrong guy for that team at that time. And I don't even necessarily think Gallant was the perfect guy, and nor do I have any idea if Quinn would have been able to take the next step with that team. Although he knew he wasn't going to see them when they turned the corner, but I think Babcock would have been a huge mistake for that young team that wasn't ready yet. The owner of the team thought they should be a lot closer, and they were not ready to win that year. They were not ready to turn the corner and be a contender. They were maybe ready to make the playoffs the following year, but they were certainly too young and too inexperienced at too many positions to be a serious contender, despite what the owner thought.
Yeah, and absolutely. And then obviously the next year they do make the playoffs with Gallant in his first year. And just talk about, I know your last season was 21-22. So it was the beginning of that year. Just, talk about your retirement, just, how you finally came to be when you said it's time to hang it up.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about it anyway, because I was getting of the age, and I had done it. I had done everything. I was getting pretty tired of the travel. I loved traveling when I was younger. It was great. I saw so many great cities and so many great games. But I think, what really kicked in my retirement thought was COVID. And we lost that whole year basically to, no locker rooms, no access, everything on Zoom, no travel. You had to go get your COVID test before the game and sit in a chair for 45 minutes while they processed it to see if you could even get into the arena. And then you go in the arena and you have to wear your mask, and you have to, you can't have dinner in there. It wasn't the same. And mostly though, it was the access. And any good journalist, and I'm not saying I was a good journalist, but anybody in this business needs to talk to players and to develop relationships. And we were able to do that for all those years before that. We were able to have one-on-one conversations with star players, and not just interviews, but you get to know them, they get to know you. All that's gone. I mean, I did a full season of Alexis Lafreniere's career and never met him because of Zoom. And that's when I decided, this is not the same anymore. And even when coming back from COVID, I didn't know if it would ever really be the same. And a lot of the reporters are telling me it's not. The access is different now. So all of that piled up on top of, I had done it for a long, long time, made retirement an option. And then in the back of my head, I also had this book idea that Triumph Books was calling me and asking me if I wanted to do it, and I was putting them off for a while, and I was like, maybe it's time to do that. And so I did.
No, definitely a good reason at that point. You got for a book, but you mentioned that, you talk about technology, especially with Zoom. COVID obviously screwed up a bunch of stuff, but how has technology and social media changed the sports writer profession?
Yeah,
And
well,
for you, how
yeah,
did you adapt to the change?
yeah. It was, I started out. I came back, let's say, in 2009 when I had been a columnist for a few years and off the beat during the Yager administration, so to speak. Um, and we had a guy who followed me, Sam Weinman. He was covering the Rangers, and he started this blog. And I never did a blog, uh, and it exploded. It was unbelievably popular. It was called Rangers Report. And Sam left the paper, and my boss called me and said, "Hey, look, that blog is really important to us. You think you could do it for a little while?" So I said, "Sure," and then I didn't have any choice, but I said, "Sure." And I started doing it, and that became my job from then until 2016. And so that began the techno part of my career, where I joined Twitter, I joined Facebook. I was even probably the oldest guy on what was that, Snapchat? I think it was. I was probably the oldest person on Snapchat at that point. And those all were brand new experiences, obviously, for me and for everybody, but especially for a guy who was, who used to type his stories on a typewriter. Um, but the blog opened my eyes, because never before was I able to interact with the fans. As you guys know, you couldn't get that before that. And all of a sudden, there were communities of these people, and they're nuts. I mean, the Ranger fans, they're among the most loyal, maybe the most loyal, them and Jet fans perhaps, because they still come to the games. The team stinks for years and years, doesn't make the playoffs, doesn't get a sniff of the playoffs, and they fill the building. They wear the jerseys, they buy the jerseys. They're nuts. And I say that in a good way. Some of them are nuts in other ways too. I mean, the coach is always wrong, no matter who the coach is. There's always one defenseman who needs to be not only traded, but probably banished from hockey or professional sports altogether. Everybody's got these great opinions. And just as an aside, I was reading, I think it was one of Arthur Staples' stories in the Athletic, and one of the fans was going off on something, and another fan just chimed in, "Take your protein pill and put your helmet on." That was his comment. And these guys are great. Like, they're so clever. And, most of them are so clever and so witty, even when they're annoyed beyond belief. And that kind of interaction was brand new to me when I was on a blog, and when I started doing social media. Then they had me doing videos before and after games. That became more important than my stories, which was really new to me. And then, when I started up in 2009, I started doing these game reviews, which to me were just fun, and I had no idea how popular they could possibly become, but they did. So yeah, it was all a whirlwind, really, for whatever it was, the last 7 years before I left the Journal News.
Listen, you're talking to a lifelong Mets, Jets, Knicks, and Ranger fan.
You poor, you know what?
I know absolutely nothing about winning, so I completely understand how depraved you can get at certain times.
Yeah.
But obviously, you have a ton of stories that you told in your book. Were there any that you wish you could have included that you maybe didn't?
Yeah, there were some stories. There were more personal stories that, stuff that happened on the beat, and travel nightmares and things of that nature. But I think I sidestepped some stories that I probably should have included. I didn't really have the thought process to get into, for example, the downfall of Mark Pavlich and how tragic that was. And I do wish I had. It's not something you can gloss over in a few paragraphs. So things of that nature. But in terms of capturing most of the characters that I dealt with, I thought I did pretty well. A lot of short anecdotes in there about the Barry Becks of the world and the Herb Brookses and Roger Nielsen's. I'm trying not to have any regrets over what got in and what didn't.